Hi friends, Ewelina here. Welcome to the Homecomings podcast, an Audible initiative sharing vulnerable conversations with purpose-driven creatives on their life journeys, all with the intention to inspire people listening to discover the meaning of home in their own lives and come deeper back to their truest versions of self. We use home as a metaphor to represent all that beckons comfort, familiarity, and belonging for your unique life journey. Whether that's through the work that you do, the people you surround yourself with, or the things that bring you the most joy in life. Because to live a life with more home means to live a more mindful and beautiful life. And isn't that the greatest intention for us all? I'm so glad you're here. Welcome. Hello, friends. Happy Pod Tuesday. Welcome to the show. We are in week 3. We're moving right along. Week 3, baby. Here we go. My guest on the show today is Clare Parks. I am very, very excited to share this conversation with you all. Clare is someone who came into my life as a really beautiful, unexpected referral from our mutual friend, Kevin. And it was so funny. We talk a little bit in the episode. I want to offer some context for the listeners, for people tuning in. We mentioned Kevin at one point and how our connection came to be because it was so random. Kevin was a client of mine when I was at my agency in Boston still. And he had reached out to me. This was several months into my first year of business with a referral saying, hey, I have a friend who has her own business, is potentially looking for a rebrand. Do you want me to connect the both of you together? And it was really funny because he had texted me on like 10 p.m. on like a random Tuesday. And when I saw the text, I'm like, actually, he didn't lead with that. He texted me by sharing, hey, what's going on? I was like, what is this about? So random, so unexpected. Little did I know when I got back to him the next day, it turned out he wanted to send Clare my way as a referral. So that very unexpected random text led to a phone call with Clare that felt so magically aligned. And for anyone listening that meets a fellow stranger wherever, on the street, on the coffee shop, client relationship, whatever it is, coworker, and you just kind of click, like you have that incessant, yeah, this person gets me, I get them, and there's like a synchronicity. That is immediately how I felt when Claire and I connected. What was really beautiful too, and I just wanted to speak on this a little bit before we dive into the episode. What was really interesting was what she had reflected to me on that discovery call the first time we connected. She had gone on my website, and what really resonated for her and was really interesting to her was how I was sharing my immigrant home story. I mentioned in my first introductory episode all about my immigrant background, how I, in this season of my life, am really leaning into sharing that story and leading with that. Yes, to essentially help strengthen my personal brand and showcase my personal brand in a unique and very authentic, true way, but two, to really embrace that part of me deeper in my life, because I've always known I'm an immigrant, right? Like I was born in Poland. I come with this very different, we can call it, background. And I'm really trying to embrace all of that in this season. So, that all being said, I had a blog post and a little bit of my immigrant story in my about page. And when Claire read that, it really resonated for her because so kismetly, she had been diving into uncovering and unpacking her Polish roots. Her grandfather had a connection to Poland, and it was just such a beautiful way to unexpectedly bring us together. And I think I wanted to share that story because oftentimes there are so many instances where, and again, to maybe piggyback a little bit off of last week's episode with Susanna, how we talked about labels and fitting ourselves into a box, there could be this need that, we can only be one thing, but also there's this side of us that, like, for whatever reason, doesn't want to showcase the different parts of us. I think for me, for the majority of my life, didn't realize that me being an immigrant or having kind of this, like I said, maybe more of a unique story was anything. Like I almost took it for granted. And it wasn't up until, again, I started sharing it on my website and having people express to me, like, wow, this is so cool. And in the interaction with Claire, it was such a beautiful talking point and just connection between the two of us, that it was among the many reasons that we ended up working together, but also having this beautiful dynamic of like, okay, we kind of get each other, we have this thing in common. So I guess I just wanted to share that for anyone that's listening, that I don't know, has ever felt the need to restrain, for lack of a better word, from embracing all those different parts of them, because you never know what a, we could call it fun fact or interesting, I don't know, did you know, can offer to, for a connection, for an interaction, for a relationship. Like, I wonder if, I don't know, if my website was more cut and dry and plain and boring, if we would have had that very beautiful, more kind of intimate thing in common that really anchored us into the dynamic that we shared and moved forward with our relationship, our client relationship, branding nature and nurture. So, anyways, I just wanted to share that because that was top of mind. I was thinking about that prior to sitting down and recording this interview, of like basically just sharing, embrace all the different parts of you, especially if you have a personal brand. People are so caught up also in figuring out, like, how do I differentiate myself? How do I stand out? How do I, make a unique impression in the world? And I think so many people get caught up in trying to be like everyone else. It's like, if you just go back to yourself, if you truly dissect and understand the different parts and pieces of you and lead with that, whether you have a unique immigrant background story yourself, or if you spent, I don't know, a couple of years living in another country, or I don't know, got some sort of beautiful award or recognition at some point in your life, or you have a really interesting talent, or whatever it is, you never know how that fact, because it's so personal to you, can inspire or influence someone else. So just wanted to get that off my heart because that was something that was top of mind before I sat down to record this particular interview, because that was such a beautiful thing that brought Claire and I together. And what ended up unfolding from that first discovery call was, oh, I don't know how long our process was together, but it was this very incredible deep dive into her brand, nature and nurture, and the unfolding of a relationship that to this day, Claire, like, you are just someone who is so inspirational. And I just want to say, like, so badass, because you're doing all the things. You're a mom, you're running your own business, and you're doing all these incredible things through the vehicle that is your business, nature and nurture. So I want to just go over a few of the topics covered before we dive into the episode, just to give you guys a preview of what to expect, because this one's so good. So we talk about the work that Claire does as a postpartum doula, how she connects with local food systems to prepare meals for her clients, and how her love for motherhood led her to starting Nature and Nurture, which is her business. Why connecting with local food systems is critical, and why our current system is flawed with teaching young people to connect with their bodies. How Claire discovered doula work, how her pregnancy journey helped her deepen her relationship with trust, how Claire took the leap in starting Nature and Nurture after the birth of her daughter in the middle of a pandemic, the doubts and fears she navigated around starting her business, and how Claire prioritizes parenthood and raising her daughter while juggling entrepreneurship. All of this and so much more. So, without further ado, ladies and gents, please, please, please be open to this lovely conversation with Clare Parks from Nature and Nurture. Okay, well, welcome, Claire. I am so happy to have you here. Thank you so much for coming on. We were just chatting before we hit record. We're both, I think, equally excited to be diving into this conversation. The first question that I want to ask to kick us off is a little introduction of you. So, if you could share with people listening who you are, what you do, we're going to dive into all things nature and nurture and your special brand. So, to whatever capacity you want to speak about nature and nurture now, I'll have some deeper questions that we could dive into, but just, yeah, share a little bit of your story.
Okay, I was wondering if I should prepare in any way, and I decided just see
No, this
what
is on the
goes.
fly. Everything's on the
Yeah,
fly here.
it's definitely on the fly. So my name's Claire, and I am a birth and postpartum doula in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm also a midwifery assistant, so I support a midwife with home births. But as a doula, I support all kinds of births in a range of settings, like at home, in birth centers, and in the hospital. And as a postpartum doula, I do help families with newborn care, education, um, recovery from birth education and things like that. But I also help out with postpartum meals. And I focus on postpartum nutrition and all of the nutrients that your body needs to recover from something like pregnancy and childbirth. So I connect local food systems with the meals that I prepare for clients. So I take two of my great loves, which is um, putting money in the hands of the farmer, with helping new moms, new parents recover from childbirth and figuring out what it means to put their own recovery first so that they can have the energy necessary to walk through this transition into parenthood. So it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of different things, different pieces to nature and nurture and to what I do. I'm also a mom, and one of the reasons that I started this was because my love of parenting was so vast. But I also really wanted to make sure that I was raising my child, my lovely toddler, with a deep relationship to the earth and to the seasons. And to me, that includes where our food comes from, what it means to grow herbs and food from seed. Um, and also what it means to nurture that which gives us life. So that's to all of us, that's the planet. But on a smaller scale, it's also mothers and parents. So that's my driving force. And I'm always kind of tinkering with what that looks like on a day-to-day basis, but I love it. And I love being able to kind of teach my daughter these skills as I learn.
Yeah, no, I love that so much. And I remember when we first connected and we were diving in. I mean, even before we dove into working together for Nature Nurture and your brand, and you were just sharing your background, I'm like, okay, whoa, like you come from like such a multifaceted walk of life. Like you've had your hands in so much. And so I'm curious if you can even speak a little bit to how you kind of came. I mean, you alluded and shared a lot of what you do, but prior to you doing what you're doing now, do you feel like all the different paths you've walked in a sense have brought you here? And I feel like the question to that is yes, but maybe if you want to share to some more detail, like what if there were any specific avenues that you feel like brought you to doing what you're doing today, whether it was through your education, whether it was through different side jobs that you've taken on in the past, because I feel like all the paths, or at least I like to believe, there's always a culmination. You know, everything kind of happens for its reasons to bring you to the next destination.
Yeah, no, this is like my answer to this question is so 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 intense. 'Cause
Feel
yes,
free to
the
go,
answer
yeah, feel free to go in as much depth and detail as you like.
is like, okay, please feel free to keep me focused as needed.
Of course.
But yes, the answer to your question is yes, definitely everything that I've done up until now has brought me here. So, I mean, in college, I studied psychology. And so I just became obsessed with why do we do what we do? What drives us? Is it nature? Is it nurture?
Hmm.
Um, really dove deep into what drives human behavior, and I've always been kind of a seeker in that way too, like a spiritual seeker, an intellectual seeker. I just want to get to the root of most questions that I have, and I tend to dive really deep and struggle with staying on the surface. um, and so I didn't pursue psychology in grad school. I pursued health education because I was really interested in women's health specifically. I felt like I didn't have a great understanding of my body. I didn't have a great relationship with it. And when I read some of the research around how we teach health to young women specifically, I had a huge problem with it. I don't think it was, I thought, I'm gonna try and keep it, like, to summarize it as best I can.
Mhm.
I thought it just was disempowering, and I thought that there had to be a better way. Like, we can help young people develop a deeper relationship with their body, develop a relationship with their body that allows them to love themselves. If we just learn to love ourselves and talk to kids differently about how to take care of ourselves and what that really means. And so I studied health education, and I taught health in high schools, and in after school programs, middle and high schoolers. And I was always kind of tinkering with, like, how do we talk to young people about our bodies, to enhance their relationship with it. And of course, that includes, like, to young women, talking about the menstrual cycle. How can we introduce the menstrual cycle as something that's not this, like, painful curse that we just have to get through for the rest of
Yeah.
our lives, but something that, like, is life giving and can teach us a lot about who we are and our understanding of ourselves. And so along the way, I was teaching, doing a lot of different things. I definitely had side jobs, like working. One of the most significant side jobs that I had was working at, I guess more of like, it was a grocery store slash deli that prioritized a relationship with local farms. And this was
Mm.
in DC. And so I was teaching and working there and developing an understanding of food systems. And a lot of what I was learning as I was teaching was, like, the importance of taking young people to farmers markets. Like, as a teenager, middle schooler, and teenager myself, I didn't care about where my food came from in any way. I just cared about, like, what tasted good. But if you can get a young person to grow something from seed and to do something with their hands and to harvest it themselves, that could potentially have a greater impact on, like, what foods they're putting in their bodies later, if they know where it's coming from and who it's coming from, like
Yeah.
what farmer grew that potato. But we also did a lot of, like, cooking classes and cooking competitions. Again, just kind of doing things with your hands to understand, like, what actually goes into the meal that's in front of you. So I spent a lot of time learning about food systems, and then working at this grocery store also kind of enhanced my understanding of where the food is coming from and how to prioritize a relationship with that, instead of just, like, going to the grocery store and getting a piece of produce that's been sitting in plastic in a truck for thousands of miles, before even wondering where, like, how that food got to our plate. So that was always kind of a number one obsession as I was teaching and learning post college. But I was also still really interested in women's health and this relationship to our bodies. And I was developing a deeper relationship to the earth and where our food came from, and also developing a deeper understanding of, like, what happened to my relationship with my body in terms of how people taught me about what it means to grow up as a woman in this world.
Mhm.
And so I came across a doula training at some point in my graduate degree as I was teaching. So I was studying health education, getting my doctorate in health ed, while I was teaching. Well, I was teaching and academic advising, so doing kind of a hybrid job at a nonprofit at the time. And I came across a doula training, and I was like, I read the description, and I was like, I don't exactly know why this is resonating so much, but something about this just seems like the next step.
Yeah.
Um, and I went to the training. It was with an organization called Mama Glow in Brooklyn, and the teacher was Latham Thomas, and she was like, she's a born teacher. She was incredibly powerful, incredibly transformative, and she definitely prioritized the conversation around health disparities, which was a priority for me at the time, because I didn't just want to learn from someone that talked about, like, women's health in general. I wanted to learn from someone that kind of acknowledged a lot of the systems of oppression that have created the disparities that we're seeing in women's health. And that was her priority. And it was a totally spiritual experience. So
Mm.
it was a 3-day training. And at the end of every training, I would walk like the entirety of the Brooklyn Bridge and just let all the information integrate. And I felt incredibly resonant with all of it. And I felt incredibly powerful.
Wow.
And I was like, I don't exactly know where this is going to go, or if I would be ready to be a doula right now, because I'm not even a mom. But I know that this has changed me in some way. And then very soon after, I found out I was pregnant.
Oh, the timing.
I was like, okay, uh,
Yeah.
unexpected. And of course, like as someone who's been teaching health education and like, you know, so focused on women's health, like the relationship with our bodies, I was like, oh, I didn't have a good enough relationship with my body to understand, like to have
Mhm.
a planned pregnancy. Isn't that interesting?
No,
Um,
I just had to show it to you that way.
yeah, exactly. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm learning a lot through personal experience. Um, But I was like, okay, we're doing it. Like, I'm going to go to the second weekend of training and I'm going to be aware that I'm pregnant this time. And it's I'm going to see what happens here because this seems like a huge shift is happening.
Mhm.
And that's what I did. I went to the second phase of the training and I like told my teacher I found out that I was pregnant and it happened like basically the same weekend of the training. I can't believe this. And it was, again, incredibly powerful and incredibly clear that this is the path that I was going to be going down. So I was finishing up my dissertation as I was starting a doula mentorship with a different organization called Manhattan Birth. And actually, a good friend of mine from my prior work also did the same mentorship. And that felt very kismet like, wait a second, we're both here because she had just had a baby. And I was like, okay, there's some sort of shift happening um, in both of us. And it's interesting that we're here at the same place. And I got to spend my pregnancy
Mhm.
surrounded by doulas and midwives. And I was like, absolutely in shock. I was like, these people know how to treat a pregnant person. Like, it was very clear, you know, just kind of going out into the real world and getting comments from people about pregnancy and people having no idea, like having to do some really intensive work while in my first trimester of pregnancy and not being able to tell anybody, and then going to like my doula mentorship classes and being kind of surrounded by love and support. I was like, there's such a such a disparity in this experience. So I was just so moved by what it meant to spend my pregnancy surrounded by doulas and midwives. And through my pregnancy, I started switching the care that I wanted to receive and like at my place of birth. So I hired my own doula, and she was wonderful and lovely. And she was one of several children born at home. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. But she didn't push anything on me in any way. I was just like, that's really cool to have an example of like a home birth that I've never seen
Mhm.
before. And I had started my pregnancy in the care of an OB, but every single appointment that I went to, I was so anxious. I was like in tears every time, you know, we did a couple ultrasounds, and every time I was like, we're going to find out something horrible. I'm so scared. I can't even look. And I just thought that's how I was. I had a ton of
Mhm.
health anxiety throughout my life. So I was like, this is expected. But then the more I talked to the midwives that were in charge of my doula training, the more I realized like I actually don't have to feel this scared. So I switched to hospital-based midwives because I was really interested in learning about the midwifery model of care and how midwives actually trust birth, and they trust they trust the pregnant person, and they trust the kind of intuitive signals that a pregnant person is receiving, and they trust birth as a process. It's not treated as like a disease or something to be feared or treated, and it's also, you know, a process of kind of looking for the signs that this pregnancy is low risk, and that we can get to know the entire person. So I switched to hospital-based midwives because that felt like kind of the middle of the road. I wouldn't be ready for a home birth yet, but I really like the midwifery model of care, so I'm going to stick with them. And then the more time I spent with them, I was like, they're great, they're lovely, I really enjoy them, but I really like what the main mentor at the doula training, the mentorship I'm doing. I really like her vibes. Like, I really want to be around her. She's super smart. She makes me feel super comfortable, and she is so trusting of birth. I feel almost no fear about pregnancy about labor when I'm around her. And so I reached out to her finally, and I was like, "Do you happen to have availability for my due date?" And I spoke to her assistant at the time, and she was like, she eased my mind. She was amazing to talk to, and she was like, "Just come in for a meeting. Like, we'll see what happens." And I had a meeting with my midwives, and my whole body was resonant. Like, this is a yes. Like, these are your people. There's absolutely no question. they just made me feel so
Mm.
comfortable. They were so research oriented, but they were also super in tune with kind of like the sacredness of pregnancy and labor. And they eased every single fear that I had. And I was like, my body was making it very clear, like, this is a 100% yes. So I share that to say that I was also working on developing a much stronger relationship with my own intuition, and that pregnancy and my relationship, like
Mhm.
switching from provider to provider to listening to that full body yes, was what also helped me kind of like feel the confidence to launch my own business and to birth the way that I did. Um, and then to go on to help people develop that sense of self trust in themselves. So that was like,
Yeah.
that was a huge shift. I hadn't started my business yet. I was still in training, and then, had my baby, and I am so incredibly grateful for my experience and to have worked with midwives that trusted me so much. And that I also, my health was such that maintained a low risk pregnancy. So I was able to have the birth that I wanted, because there's so much out of our control, but I was also my relationship with myself that was deepening, that allowed me to seek out the resources and the mentors that I needed to really believe that that was possible. Um, and that was an incredibly healing experience. And it was, I really I can hardly put to words how transformative that was. Just the people that I got to surround myself with
Mhm.
at the birth, and learning what it really means to trust myself. Like, it was a relationship with self that I had never even imagined before. And they helped me
Yeah.
cultivate it in a way that was just life changing forever. And so I had my beautiful baby. We had like a lovely postpartum with plenty of family support. And then we were in New York City at the time. And 3 weeks after she was born, um, it was COVID lockdowns. So
Mm.
it
Good.
was really, really intense and really, really scary. And of course, I'm laughing about it now because that's how I tend to deflect from any other emotion,
Mhm.
in a conversation like this one. But it was an incredibly intense experience. It was the scariest thing I could have
Mhm.
imagined. We didn't go outside for 4 months. Like, I was already super scared before we even heard the word COVID. And then that happened, and I was like in a different place. So we ended up moving down south, because that's where my family was. And it just seemed like, they are able to like get sunshine and at least be outside. And we're too scared to walk down the hallway right now. And so we made this shift, which felt like a very scary, like, is this the right move, you know, type of shift. But we did it. We made it down here. And then that's when I started sort of having more of the capacity to like start my business as things started to shift in the world. And that's what helped me hone my focus on postpartum support, was that I had like 3 weeks of really wonderful and lovely family support and doula friend support and midwife support. And I went from feeling so supported to complete isolation. And so I felt that very significant difference. And I came down here and I didn't see a lot of postpartum support. And I was like, this is where it's got to start. So I started with postpartum
Yeah.
meals and postpartum support and postpartum nutrition. So I brought in my love of food systems, of growing your own food, of connecting people with the farmers that grow our foods, with postpartum recovery, with everything I learned about postpartum recovery. So I shifted some of my trainings to like medicinal kitchen for postpartum recovery courses, and I brought all of these great loves together. And I started out with that as my niche. And then I started, once my daughter got old enough, and things started to feel a little bit safer, I was able to attend more births. And then I started working for midwives. And I was like, okay, this is where we're going. And throughout my pregnancy,
Yeah.
I also just started to feel like, at my first doula training, I was like, I love everything she was saying about herbs, but I know nothing about herbs. And one of my mentors was like, listen to that call. Like, if you're interested in it, there's a reason for that. So just listen to it.
Mhm.
And then that
Yeah.
was what really pushed me to prioritize studying and eventually like formally studying herbalism. So when I moved down here, I took a botanical medicine course to be able to understand like the medicinal plants around us. And then I kept studying and starting my herbal apprenticeship. Really just like my initial motivation was just to like support me with parenting and help my daughter learn these skills. And now it's a thing. It's like become a great love as well.
Thank you for sharing all of that. And I was especially excited to connect, just to have the conversation with you today, because I know, and I mentioned when we started working together and when we were working on the Nature Nurture brand, naturally we took a deep dive on all things you and the brand. But going into this conversation, I know there was so much more. You shared your background before, but I'm like, okay, I know there's this influence and that influence, but I know we weren't able to capture the full story and all the pieces and all that. So it's beautiful, selfishly for me now in hindsight, looking like, oh my gosh, now I can so see the amalgamation of your journey and how everything just so beautifully has come into play and has now manifested into the vehicle that is Nature and Nurture. I love so much what you shared about the trust and the intuition. I think oftentimes, at least for myself, when I've been kind of walking on this journey of life, it's you're in the moment, you're in the now. At least I think back to the previous jobs I've worked, and it's almost like you can't see beyond what's next. Maybe you're unfulfilled or you're unsatisfied or something feels off. There's a nudge that pulls you to get to the next thing. And it sounds like for you, God like slowly just showed you the next steps to get you to the next thing, to get you to the next thing. Tell me, because I'm curious, when it came to that like full body knowing, especially when you first went to that doula or that class, and when you connected with your mentor, how did that knowing feel for you? Because I think oftentimes, at least for myself, there's the moments where I'm like, "Ooh, this feels different," but I can't always put my finger on it. And as of most recently, I'm trying, and this has been a recent practice for me, is really leaning into the embodiment, like listening to the body. What is your body telling you? What are the clues? What are the signs? It almost feels like such a foreign concept because I think for a lot of us, we've been so detached from our bodies, and I'm sure this is something that you probably saw firsthand, especially from your women's studies, especially with women. So tell me a little bit about like what that feeling for you felt like, because it's something tangible that you could describe. And like, how did that feeling keep you going? Or was it the same feeling every single time, like that home base that you always came back
Yeah,
to?
I it's such an interesting question because it's challenging to think of what it felt like back then because I know what it feels like now,
Mm,
but I do wonder if there's a difference
yeah.
because I was still working on developing a stronger relationship with myself. So for example, I
Hmm.
started to feel, at the nonprofit I was working at, I just started to feel I'm trying to describe how I was experiencing resistance, but and like this is the only thing that I could do. I just started to feel like I was
Yeah.
banging my head against a wall. It wasn't literally, but I was
Yeah.
like, something has gone awry here. And if I don't
Hmm.
leave now, I was at a point where many of the students that I had just worked with for 4 years were about to graduate high school. And I was like, we're at a nice point of completion. If I go beyond this, it's not the thing. And I don't know what's going to happen if I were to go beyond this. It might just be, subtly, like very slowly but surely hating my day to day. Or it might be kind of a
Yeah.
chaotic explosion. I have no idea, but I know that it's time. Like I'm coming up against something that's telling me it's no longer. So when I went
Yes.
and I almost didn't listen to it. There were like 6 months where I was like, no, you can stay, you can go. And I was like, really? I was like letting other people kind of convince me, like, stay, it's the right thing, you can do great role. And I was
Mm.
like, okay. But I still kept coming up against that grating feeling in my chest of like, this is that you gotta go. And so when I went to the doula training
Mhm.
for the first time, um, the way that I want to describe it is like just I guess you could just call it like vibrational resonance. It was just like a like woo, 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 woo. Like
Yeah.
everything around me feels right. This is it. This is the place that you're supposed to
Mm.
be. A lot of it
Mhm.
too was a little bit of nostalgia, like a nostalgic feeling, maybe some grief of like, this feels like a ceremony in the way that many people, cross a threshold before becoming a parent.
Mhm.
And we have not been given a lot of initiations or thresholds or ceremonies to acknowledge, any of our major transitions in life in general. But especially as women, like imagining what could be possible if we had a ceremony or some sort of acknowledgement by community, like we're going through an initiation when we start our first cycle, or something like that. Same thing with parenthood. And so I think nostalgia was definitely a significant feeling of like, there's something that my body knows about this, that this is the right thing. Um, for my
Mm-hmm.
midwives, when I switched care to the people that it was very clear that this is the right care. Um, that just felt like, my body just felt like safety and security. And so for me, feeling
Mm.
anxious became a sign, like the questioning and the ruminating and all of the what ifs and all of the fears that were very prevalent in my head became the sign that it was not the right fit. And so just kind of the quiet, warmth that these are like your safe people. Yeah, that is the best way I can describe those full body yeses.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Do you find that the knowing for you has gotten stronger since you've leaned into trusting yourself more? Because I imagine like the first time is always like, oh my God. And like you were sharing, people are sharing their opinions, and naturally you want to pull to gravitate towards like, oh, maybe they're right. And then it's your logic, your logical brain takes over. You're like, oh my gosh, and you kind of step away from the heart and what it ultimately wants to do. But then I imagine you say yes to that, and then the fear dissipates because you've shown, oh, actually I'm supported and this feels aligned. So then the next opportunity comes. Granted, every opportunity may feel different, but it almost sounds like it's a muscle that the more you work and you strengthen, the easier it becomes. So when you're met with these decisions now, whether it's a business or life or whatever, do you find that intuition now being stronger? Since, and I mean, it sounds like you've honed in and cultivated that so much deeper
Yeah,
throughout
I
your
think
journey.
my pregnancy was an amazing opportunity to practice that, because every time I stepped out of my midwife's office, there was somebody in my family, in my circle, that was trying to tell me how reckless I was being and how unsafe my decisions were. My decision to have a home birth was.
Mm.
And so I would absorb that and believe them and agree. And then I would, and did a lot of crying. And then I would go back, into the meeting with my midwives, and they didn't do any convincing, but I just felt like safe and comfortable again. And I was like, no, this is a very clear yes. Like, this is it for me. And so I got to practice that all throughout my pregnancy. And then I do think I certainly lost a little bit of that when my daughter was born, because my heart was cracked open, and I've like never loved a being, nor did I know I was capable of such love. And so I had to go through some old stuff, and I'm still doing that, because now like I'm born anew with her birth, and so I have to continue to learn what that looks like when I love somebody so much, what does my relationship with myself, my intuition look like? And that's still new, but I have, like you said, I've flexed that muscle. I've developed a lot of practice, but definitely within her first year of life, I was back in that place of like, I don't know what is real. Like, I don't know what's fear. I don't know
Mhm.
what's trust. I just want to make sure that I keep her alive in a pandemic. Um, and so there was a lot
Yeah.
of fear again. And so since I think like maybe since she got closer to 10 or 12 months, I started to lose a lot of that fear and come back to this place of like, where is my relationship with myself? And so I still have a tendency, I've noticed like when I dive in with tunnel vision of like, I don't want to ask any questions. I don't want to know if this is the right thing. It sounds good. It feels good right now. So I'm just going to go for it. Like that is me being
Yeah.
frantic, and that's me not wanting to check in with myself. And so I still make those mistakes of like, yeah, I want to do this thing and I want to do that thing, and I'm not going to I'm not going to take time to pause. I'm just going to go for it. And then I'll realize like once I'm, deep in the thick of it, of this project or whatever it is, of like, oh, this is not for me.
Yeah.
I wish I had maybe taken a minute, and
Yeah.
then I untangle myself so deeply. Um, so I still do that
Yep.
all the time, but I feel like I'm able to catch myself a little quicker when I'm doing it. And so if I do get kind of
Mm,
tangled into something that is not like clearly not the thing, it's easier to kind of walk back and recognize like, okay, I'm still learning that lesson. I'm still learning how not to dive in so quickly, so deeply. Um, so
yeah.
again, it's that same kind of like I feel like I'm trudging through the mud if I'm in something that's not for me, and I realize like, oh shit, I did it again. Like
Mhm.
this doesn't feel good. But when it is the right fit, yeah, there's just like a warmth and a joy and an ease in my whole body.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, I mean, again, life is gonna, I feel like it's never ending because they say, life is the journey. So we're gonna be met with this stuff all the time. But it sounds like at this point, you've garnered it's almost like I want to use the analogy of like the tools in the tool belt that you could lean on whenever you're met with those decisions again to know, like, okay, how can I find the comfort, find the warmth to get me to either pivot or change or see it a different way or whatever it is. So, yeah, yeah. I want to dive into now talking a little bit about nature and nurture because that was the vehicle for how we got connected and our souls got into working together and knowing each other. I mean, you've shared so much of your journey so far, and I personally, like I mentioned, knowing you and working with you, I could so see how all the pieces fit. But I'm curious, as after you had your daughter and when you got into the point of, moving down to South Carolina and starting to do the meals and all that, the moment before you recognize like nature and nurture is happening, or like when the moment it came into being, was it like one day you woke up and were like, okay, I'm just gonna brand this and this is gonna be a thing? Like I'm so curious because I'm fascinated by the origin stories, and it sounds like your journey was such a beautiful unfolding of one thing after the next that when you got to the point of doing nature and nurture, like what was that like exact moment that you're like, okay, I'm going to start this business for myself? And naturally with that, then you step into this role of, the entrepreneur, the business owner and all that, all amidst all your other things that you were doing. So what was that moment like for you?
Um, there are certainly pieces that were like an overnight epiphany, and then there were other things that were again kind of slowly but surely. So when I first moved down here,
Mhm.
I was going back into a full time job in health education, and so I was like, I'm not ready to do full time doula work yet. I'm not ready to go. That like I'm just going to go back to what I know. I still want this health education, school based health education to be a piece of my life. So I'm going to start there and then slowly add on, doula clients as I can. And that was lovely. I found a great job and a great fit at a great school. And I started having panic attacks. And and I was like, no, it's just because of COVID. It's just postpartum anxiety. Like, it doesn't mean I have to change my mind. But there was one time when I was driving to a meeting and I was sitting in the meeting and I was like, staving off, uh, you know, just trying to like be able to stay seated. I was feeling so anxious. I was like, I can get through this conversation and then I'm going to go home and see my child. Um, I
Mm.
realized, and I'm incredibly grateful. Like there were a lot of kind of foundational supports in place that allowed me to be able to make this choice. My daughter's dad being one of them, my mom being one of them. I got home from the meeting and I, gave them both a big hug and I was like, I can't do this yet. Like I can't be away from her on someone else's schedule. I need to know that every minute I
Mm.
spend away from her is like, you know, deep within my soul, like a yes, like this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. So this is certainly a leap that I feel like understandably not everybody feels like they can take. And I am so grateful to have had the level of support that I did for them both to look at me and say like, okay, that makes perfect sense. You don't have to. Um,
Mm.
and so
Yeah.
I'm incredibly grateful for that moment. I remember it very specifically. And I was like, okay, well, then I'm doing this. Like, this is a clear sign. Again, it was kind of like I was feeling so incredibly anxious, um, not dissimilar to how I was feeling with when I was with the wrong provider during my pregnancy. I was like, this
Mhm.
anxiety, like these panics, like, yes, they're real and legitimate. And they're also a red flag that like something else is going awry in terms of like where I'm spending my time, where I'm putting my energy. And so I'm going to therefore devote all my energy towards the thing that I know I want to do. And I was just kind of too scared to take the leap. So that's what felt like it forced me to take the leap into like kind of building this business full time. So I had already like purchased the LLC and gone through, you know, LegalZoom and stuff, but I was like not ready to make it
Mm-hmm.
mine yet. But it was that experience, like feeling very clearly not ready to, you know, leave my daughter and like feeling very unaligned with the job that I had taken. That was definitely a jumping off point. So I'm really grateful that I had the support to be able to take that huge leap. And then, like I definitely couldn't have done it without them. And I still can't do it without them. um, yeah.
Popular friend.
But then I think it was truly an overnight name that came to me. I think you asked me this once before. You're like, how nature and nurture? And I was like, what do you mean how nature and nurture? Like, that
Yes.
is the only name. There's nothing else to
I love
the name.
that. Yes.
So it goes back to me being
Yes.
so deeply obsessed with like what drives each of us.
Mhm.
And then also wanting to use the like the opportunity of pregnancy to develop a relationship with the natural world, and for me wanting to honor and nurture again like that which gives us life, which is our planet and also mothers, parents as a whole. And like the play on the question in psychology, like what makes us tick? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Were we born this way? Was it something our parents or society did? That's kind of like the question that's always in my ether. So that is the a little bit of the origin story.
That's so beautiful. And like you said at the beginning, it's both the kind of moment maybe too that like, okay, it's happening, but it's been such a gradual journey. I mean, of all your life, it sounds like everything brought you to what you're doing now. But that moment when you had the anxiety and you're like, okay, I can't do this, but then you were supported. I found in my experience too, at least with starting my business, it's like there is the fear, there is the anxiety. I was so unfulfilled in my previous job from what I was doing, and so there's always the fear of taking the risk, because I'm sure, and actually maybe I'd love to hear maybe some of the fears that were looping through your head before that. Because for myself, naturally it's like, how am I going to get money? How am I going to get paid? Where are my clients going to come from? And so maybe prior to officially taking the leap to doing nature and nurture, could you speak a little bit to some of the fears that came up for you? Like, because if you're stepping into this role, if you're, doing the business ownership full time, I imagine there's uncertainties, there's doubts. So what did some of those look like for
Yeah,
you?
I mean, I think it was everything you just described of like where how am I possibly going to get money? Like who would pay me? Like how do I even have a
Yeah.
legitimate skill or offering that's like worthy of that? How am I going to put myself out there? I just became a mom myself. Like, do I even know what I'm doing? There was a lot of that. Definitely, security and stability fears. Definitely a lot of rumination around like who the hell am I to go out there and offer something, yeah,
Mhm.
offer something great. And then like how am I logistically, how are we going to put this all together? Like, are we ever going to get childcare? Like, are we ever going to feel safe with putting our daughter, out there in the world with someone else in this like post COVID, very much in COVID world? Like, what does this even look like? I don't want to be away from her for a single second. When am I going to feel ready for that? So there was a lot. There was a significant loop, and I feel that it was only through practice and stepping into it that I started to quiet those fears a little bit. It was just like, I don't know the answer,
Mm.
but I'm going to go talk to other doulas in the area. And then I don't know the answer, but I'm going to put my name out there as a referral, or like, if anybody has a client referral or like they can't take on a client, like I'm going to let them know I'm available. So I just started dipping my toe in and just practicing before I was ready to be able to get to the point of believing those things. And now those fears feel so far away. They still exist, but I feel so much more comfortable with them. I'm like, yeah, it's normal that I would worry about what money is going to look like next month, because this is what I've committed to. I've committed to the ups and downs of entrepreneurship, and I kind of like this wild ride.
Now, that was actually going to be my next question is like, how did you navigate those fears? How did you break through them? And I mean, to what you shared, it resonates for me too, because it's in the action, it's in the doing. Like, you literally, if you're all in, you got to go all in. It's when you throw yourself in it that then when you face it, you're like, actually, this isn't so scary. For myself, when I took the leap to starting my business, clients like came out of the woodwork because people found out and they're like, oh, like Ewelina's doing her own thing, like let me reach out to her and all this stuff. And I was just supported. And it sounds like for you too, like by you taking the action and putting yourself out there, you were met with that support that you were seeking. I mean, you even shared that when you even came to, you know, your mom and your partner and told them like, okay, I can't do this, they were there to support you. And I think so many times, I know I'm guilty of this, I mean, this happens every now and then. It's like you stop yourself from doing the thing because the fear takes over, but if you just maybe asked or took the leap, then you might be surprised to know that there's some support or something on the other
Yeah.
end. So
And I feel like there always is.
yeah,
I don't know. I certainly took it
yeah.
very slowly and like dipped my toe and just kept practicing and like doing the scary thing. And I think I think that's even how I like that kind of brought me to you, because I just decided like, okay, I've been doing this really slowly, but I have great ideas for how I want to keep building what I'm doing, and I'm just going to start telling people because I'm scared, and that sounds scary, but I'm going to tell people anyways. So I was sitting with friends at a wedding and I just started talking about my ideas, and then that's when my friend's partner was like, I really like that idea. Like, I need to connect you with my friend Minnow, who is like an amazing. Like, you need to do this, you need to do that. But that was like the one that stuck, was reaching out to Minnow, and then you and I started chatting, and you were like, well, like I was born in Poland, and this was at the time that my grandfather, whose family is from Poland, was like just down, and I
Right.
was like, tell
Yes.
me more, because I was going through like ancestral journey of like near the end of his life, and I was learning about the beginning of his life, and then I met you, and I was like,
I completely forgot about that. Yes, I completely forgot about that connection that we had. Oh my gosh, yes. Oh, and it's so funny as you were talking because it brought me back to when Kevin had like reached out to me. It was so random because he had texted me at like 10 p.m. on like a Tuesday, like a random night. And I kind of like rolled my eyes. I'm
yeah,
like, what is this? I literally didn't think anything of it. And I think I brought that energy into our call because I'm like, I don't know what this is. This, you know, no expectations. But then it was just such a beautiful serendipitous connection that we had, and it sounds like we were both looking for
yeah.
each other.
He connected me to someone else, and it like didn't go anywhere because I was like, meh. But then when we chatted, I was like, okay, I'm going for it.
That Rumi quote, I love this quote. I live by this quote. What you seek is
Yeah,
seeking you. And I think this was like exactly one of those things. I feel like we were both seeking each
yeah,
other but didn't know it. And it sounds like in a way it happened so unexpectedly, but also perfectly in the way that it exactly was intended to happen.
it really
So
was. It was
yeah.
very cool.
I want to ask you this next question here. This is something that I was sitting with before jumping on. I was like, oh, I want to ask Claire because I had a conversation with my client Susanna, who is also a mom, and she shared something so beautiful that stuck with me, and she was speaking to how being a parent has changed, not only changed her life, but changed the way that she leads her business. And so I want to ask you, how has being a mom and becoming a parent not only shifted your life, which you spoke to a little bit, but maybe has an impact or a play on how you lead nature and nurture and how you do your
Oh my
business?
goodness. Yeah, that's such a good question. I'm learning so much from that every single day. So I mean, being a parent has changed me in every possible way, in ways that I never understood until I stepped into this experience. It just changes every cell in your body, you know, immediately and also slowly.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, and in a personal sense, it's just like I have this constant mirror, like pushing me to grow into the absolute best version of myself and teaching me, you know, where I'm falling short, not in a perfectionistic way, but where I can just like face myself and do better. And so I absolutely love her for that. She also teaches me like just joy and presence in ways that nobody else can but your own child, or any child, but especially your own. And then in
Yeah.
terms of how I lead nature and nurture, I mean, I came into this with a tendency to overdo absolutely everything, like to fill my plate up until it's so full, like it's completely spilling off. Like there's no way you can possibly eat everything that you just put on your plate. It's ridiculous. And that is what my nervous system used to be comfortable with. That's how I did grad school. I was like working full time. That's I was teaching, but then also working at that market, like for no reason other than just needing to fill up my plate and feeling completely comfortable with that. And so I started my business with that nervous system recognition of like, yeah, this is what's normal and comfortable, of just overdoing, taking on too many clients, taking on too many things. But now I have my child, and I'm talking about, on my website and my conversations, like how important it is to honor parents and our recovery and our ability to care for our children in a society that gives us absolutely no care as parents. So how can I talk to parents about that, about taking care of themselves and honoring themselves and nurturing themselves so that they can better nurture their children, because we're the ones that bring life, and then not have the time to like be 100% fully with her. So for example, like
Mm-hmm.
spending time cooking at people's houses, but then not having any time to like make up our home to be the nurturing place that I want it to be for her. And just kind of noticing that discrepancy and noticing like, where am I putting my energy outward for other people, for other families, and not being like feeling like I have the capacity to do that at home for her, and then learning from that, like being willing to face that, and then very quickly learning that lesson of like, what does she deserve? Like, yes, I want to thrive in business, I want to support families, I want to support the earth, like I want to cultivate a relationship with the earth, but how am I sacrificing her nourishment in order to do so? So I'm always kind of playing with that balance, because I never want to send the message that like the external is far more important than the internal. I'm always kind of paying attention to like, is it too much smoke and mirrors? Am I saying things that I don't actually do? Am I paying more attention to, this is a metaphor. I don't really care about how my lawn looks, but it's the idea is the idea of like, the lawn is perfect, but there's a lot of yelling in the house. Like I'm always aware of that
Mm-hmm.
discrepancy, especially in our society. Like we certainly incentivize like how the external looks and not as much like the internal world. And so I'm always paying attention to that. Is like, how is she doing? She's a reflection of how I'm doing with like cultivating what's happening at home first, and then taking like from that wellspring and being able to give from that overflow to my clients and to my families and in my work.
Oh, I love that so much. And again, I mean, I feel like your daughter was brought to you for that she was a gift for so many reasons. And it's so beautiful to hear that now in this season of life that you're in. It's like, I mean, you were talking about the balance. It's like you use her for almost for almost like a for reference, I guess we can use that word, to tune back into yourself and to kind of gauge like how you're doing. So, and like you shared, it's like if you're standing firm, if you're grounded and you're rooted, then you're pouring from yourself, and then therefore to all your other avenues, whether it's your business, it's her, it's your fam, all the things. And at the end of the day too, I mean, you mentioned you're doing so much and at the end of the day it's like there's only so much that you can do too. But coming back to that self piece, man, that's huge. That is
Yeah,
so
and
big.
there's so many mirrors in life, but the intensity of the mirror from your own
Yeah.
child is like, okay, you have no choice.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine. I'm not a mother yet, but when I
You have
become
the
one,
mentors in place.
yes, I know. And so many of my best friends now are in that season of life where they're stepping into motherhood. So I feel like I have a first front row seat to witnessing their journey and all they're navigating. So I'm pulling a lot of nuggets away. I'm kind of tucking them away from like, okay, when my time comes. So yeah, yes. Okay, I want to ask this question next. It's related to purpose. Because so much of what I love to do with not only the work that I do, but also I think what lights me up too with my brand is this whole intention of purpose. And I feel like when we worked together to do nature and nurture branding, we really locked in and honed in on that purpose and intentionality. And so we unearthed that, we discovered that for nature and nurture. But for you, for Claire, I want to ask you, what does purpose mean to you? And do you feel like you're currently in alignment with your purpose?
Whoa.
I know it's like a simple but loaded question.
Yeah, it's both and for sure. I, like I said, have always been a seeker. And so I think I was always kind of asking my question, like, what's my purpose? I can't find my purpose. I need to figure out my purpose. Like, am I in my purpose? Kind of obsessing over that in my mind as opposed to figuring out what that feels like in my body. And I just took a class with an energy work teacher, transformative energy work teacher that I have taken classes with for many years now. His name is Kenneth Hover. And I got full body yes, like that full resonant understanding of this is what it is like perhaps it's not, and this is paraphrasing what he said, perhaps it's not necessarily about, finding our purpose, but to engage purpose in every moment. Um, and I think
Mm,
that is so special and resonant with me because I have had so many things that I, fall in love with and get so interested in and want to pursue. I have so many passions and so many interests. I could never choose just one purpose. And so instead of like looking for the one thing that I came here to do and that fulfills me, it's like finding purpose in whatever it is I'm doing. And to me that looks like presence and flow and love and joy with any project that I'm engaged in, because there's so many different things that I do in my business, whether it's like making herbs or supporting someone during birth or prenatal education or postpartum meals. Like any one of those things could be my purpose, but really what my purpose is like bringing purpose into each of those activities, bringing like presence and doing it with love and coming back to it if I'm not able to access like the idea, like Kenneth's idea of engaging purpose in this moment, And so in that sense,
yeah.
yes, I feel very aligned. Every moment is potentially an opportunity to engage purpose and to engage it with love.
I love that. And I think for you, it sounds like the constant pursuit, like you mentioned, you use the word seeker. You bring an openness and a curiosity to everything that you do. And I think that hasn't done you wrong. It's gotten you to this point, which I feel like is a pretty good place to be, knowing that there's the fulfillment and the work that you're doing is so incredible. And I love what you shared about the purpose looking different in every different capacity. It's a question I'm always sitting with and asking deeper for myself, because I think from the work that I do helping clients uncover their purpose for their brand, there is the brand purpose, which we want to ground in something. But when it comes to the human, the individual, the person behind it, is that the same? Is that different? I've had all these like life existential questions around that and like what that looks like. And so I've asked the question, and it's part of my kind of recurring closing questions that I like to ask, because the responses I've gotten so far have been so interesting. And so I always am just so open to hearing, what does that land and look like for you? So thank you for
Yeah, it's
sharing
interesting
that.
to think about
Yeah.
that. Ooh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, no,
Like,
no. Go
it's
ahead.
interesting to think
Go
about
ahead.
that versus, like, if I were to give you that answer when we were in a brand strategy session, you'd be like, great, what am I going to do with
Mhm.
that?
Yeah.
So there's certainly a
Yeah.
layer of like, and I'm a business owner that's seeking to support myself,
Mhm.
so what can we do with that when you add the layer of entrepreneurship to it? And I think you're uniquely skilled at bringing
Mhm.
that out in people. Is like you certainly care about the individual human, and their purpose, but also like how are we going to turn this into your brand without adding unnecessary layers of artificiality to it? I think you're quite skilled at that.
Yeah. Thank you. And as you were speaking, I realized I'm like, it's interesting because, the people's brands, I always see they're naturally an extension of the person behind them. So nature nurture is an extension of Claire. But in a way, they're both living, breathing things. But I almost feel like the brand has a little bit more of like a staticness to it. And naturally, because as humans, we're so much more than just this one thing. I think there's I almost see it as like a container. It's like our brands are the containers for which we can like intentionally pour very specific things in. But Claire as the human has so much more to offer. But I think the more that you could bring into that brand is the more rich and powerful it could be. And I feel like from the journeys that you've walked and all the multiple paths you've taken, I mean, you come with so much. And it was so rewarding, at least definitely for me, to just try to pull all those pieces together and make nature nurture so much more than just like, okay, you're a postpartum doula and you deliver meals. Like, no, you are so much more than that. And that's the beauty, but it's also the challenge because the more you have, then it's like the more you have to group together. But at the end of the day, I just believe it adds just so much more breadth and beauty. So
Thank you.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I still love my
Yeah.
brand. I'm like, I never want to change this. I never want to touch it.
I'm obsessed with nature nurture as well. What would you say to someone who might be listening, or whether it's there's a desire on their heart to maybe step into entrepreneurship, or just try that new side hustle or passion project? I feel like you've taken so many, I don't even want to call them pivots, but you followed your path and it's unfolded in so many unique, interesting ways that I don't know if you even knew, like if you were in the exact moment, if you knew what the next thing was going to be or what that next thing was going to look like. I guess any piece of advice or words of wisdom for someone who might be stuck in a 9 to 5, an unfulfilling situation, can't see beyond their predicament, in regards to how maybe they can shift or see beyond the situation.
Yeah, I think we all get stuck at times, and I think it's normal and to be expected, and it's all a part of it. So it's not a bad thing to feel stuck. I think like engaging with the stuckness is kind of the first piece of that. Um, but I also think it goes back to what we talked about a few minutes ago, which is just taking one step and paying attention and seeing what happens, and practicing um, doing one thing that lights you up, without a timeline and without a
Mhm.
sense of like rushing away from stability or rushing towards something new. I think you're allowed to take baby steps and to practice and to flex those muscles and to see what happens. I think paying attention to your own cues, whatever way you receive them, is a hugely important part of that. But just to know that whatever it is, it's coming. It's coming, and it's not going to happen all at
Mhm.
once. My sister told me that once, like life comes in pieces and not all at once. And I think that is a little bit of, I mean, certainly a driving force of a lot of like, okay, well, I'm just going to dip my toe and I'm just going to take one step and see what happens. So yeah, I think it always
Mhm.
comes.
And I feel too, from what you've shared, a big piece of probably taking the next step is tuning into the body and listening and knowing, like, is like you said, the word resonance, which I love. It's like, do I feel that resonance? Is there something here? Can I follow this a little bit more? Because it may lead you to who
Yeah,
knows
I
where.
think deepening your relationship with yourself is always going to lead you to
Yeah.
whatever direction you're supposed to be going in. Like if all else fails,
Oh
if you
yeah.
just deepen your understanding of self, like you're going to know what to do. you don't need anyone to tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I so believe that. I've seen it firsthand for myself as well. The more I dive into all this self-development and coaching and all that, but it's only paid off by, I think, giving me more of that certainty, that knowing, that alignment in life. So, yeah, it's both like, I guess, a blessing and a curse, because the more I come to know myself, the more that there's questions that I'm met with, but all the while I know it's, bringing me towards deeper
Well, I do
alignment.
love what you said. Didn't you post recently about like, I'm taking a break from the self-development?
Yes, and I was actually just thinking that as I was speaking, because I tend to go so deep into all of this stuff that in the last couple of months, actually it was in the last month, and I'm like, okay, I need to step away from all this for a second, because there was a moment where I came to recognize, like, it almost felt like I was
Mm-hmm.
outsourcing my power a little and depending on these external things to give me the answers, when I know I have all the answers. I just got to get quiet enough, maybe do some journaling. The answers will come to me if I sit with it a little bit, but it's quick and easy to want to just like throw them away in a way, or kind of outsource that power. So that's what was coming up for me. And it's been really interesting to navigate in the last month and witness how in those moments where I'm in a low, I just want to impulsively text someone
Totally.
like, what do I do? But I sit with myself, I journal, and it'll come. It'll always come. Granted, it's like I may have to like cry a little, but I think it's forcing me to really hone in on that
Yeah.
trust muscle, um and kind of take more authority for me in like my life,
Yeah,
if that makes
100%.
sense.
I think there's always an element of that, of like the idea that you're seeking too hard. Like the foundation means that you don't trust yourself. So there's a very fine
Mhm.
line for sure. And I personally, I think crying is a great tool. My friend Zoe says crying is an energetic portal. And I think you often find some
Ooh.
answers at the bottom of that, you know?
Ooh, thank you for sharing that, because I've felt some like emotional roller coasters the last couple of weeks come up for me, and I keep reminding myself, I'm like, just feel the feels, just feel the feels, and every time I do, on the other side of that, I'm like, okay, I'm glad I got that out.
You gotta move.
So whatever portal I'm in right now, I'm hoping it like teleports me to wherever
It
it's
will.
meant to go. Yeah. Okay, so I want to ask my last little closing question here. So I'm I'm titling this podcast the Homecomings podcast, because, as you know, my brand is all about the essence of home. And the impetus for me really wanting to share my client stories, at least in this first season, is really to inspire people listening to take whatever resonates and lands for them, but in a way to uncover the meaning of home for themselves. Because I feel like when we open up the platform for people to share their stories, it almost gives permission for other people to kind of figure out what it is for them that either lights them up, or figure out their own definitions or meanings of home. So this whole metaphor of home is so near and dear to my heart. And so I want to ask you a little bit of like a wild card question, in that, what is your favorite memory of home? I know I've been met with like such interesting reactions. Like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that.
Whoa, me neither. That's fun. Okay, my favorite memory of home. I think my favorite memory of home is when um two things. I thought of two things. So one was my dog growing up, which is like just my buddy, like
Mm.
coming home from school and just like snuggling and laying down next to him and just feeling like, okay, I'm good again. Like things are good. Doesn't matter what happened during the school day. I can just lay down next to my guy. And that like literally just like on the floor with my dog. So that is a significant memory of home. And then I love the memories I have with my family when we were kind of like breaking the pattern, like um, going against the rules of like what we're supposed to be doing. Like I'm thinking of one time when we were supposed to go to a Christmas party after church, but someone just like didn't feel well. I think they had like the stomach bug or something. And so we didn't do anything. We got to take off our like, church clothes and just get in our jammies early and like eat Chinese food and watch a movie. And It was like stupid. Yeah, I was like, I don't have to go talk to any of these like scary adults that I'm intimidated by. I don't have to like go put on a show. We get to just like be in our jammies and eat Chinese food and like do nothing and laugh and be stupid. And that is like one of my favorite memories because we were like quote unquote not following the rules, right? We were just hanging with each other.
Rebellions,
Yeah,
rebels.
that's what it felt like. Yeah.
So fun. Oh, well, this was so amazing, Claire. Thank you so much for being open to having this conversation. Can you share with everyone where people could find you, where they can find Nature Nurture?
You can find me on Instagram at natureandnurture.love.love, or on my website, www.natureandnurture.love. Thank you so much, Minnow. This is so fun. I'm so grateful.
Hi again, it's me. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully, you were able to garner some takeaways and nuggets for your personal home journey. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean the world if you left a rating and review. And if you'd like to connect deeper, find me at Studio Dumka on Instagram, where I share content on all things home, of course. Sending a big, cozy, homey hug your way, friends. Till next time.